in the tranquil seaside town of Oakridge Harbor, where fishing boats dotted the morning horizon and seagulls soared overhead, Rachel Miller guided her wheelchair along the weathered boardwalk. Her military-trained eyes scanned the surroundings. Out of habit, a skill honed through years of SEAL operations before an IED changed her life forever. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden planks as she made her way to Marcus Chen's corner store. The same route she'd taken every day for the past 2 years since settling in this peaceful coastal community. Few locals knew about her decorated past as one of the first female Navy SEALs, and that's exactly how she preferred it. "Morning, Rachel," Marcus called out as she approached his store, his friendly smile a constant in her daily routine. "The usual today." "Just the paper and coffee, Marcus," she replied, her upper body strength evident as she expertly maneuvered her wheelchair up the store's ramp. The peaceful morning shattered with the distant rumble of motorcycles. The sound grew louder, more menacing, until the thunder of engines filled the quiet harbor front. 5 motorcycles, then 10, then 15 rolled onto the boardwalk, their chrome gleaming under the morning sun. The black tide riders had arrived. Marcus's expression tightened as he watched them through his store window. The notorious biker gang had been terrorizing small coastal towns up and down the Pacific Northwest for months. Rachel remained calm, continuing to read her paper as the bikers dismounted. Their leader, Derek Thompson, swaggered toward the store, his leather vest adorned with patches that spoke of violence and intimidation. His eyes fixed upon Rachel with predatory interest. "Well, what do we have here?" Slash's voice carried across the boardwalk, drawing snickers from his gang. "Didn't know this town had a wheelchair section." Rachel continued reading her paper, her expression neutral. She'd faced worse in her time, much worse. The streets of Fallujah had taught her that real danger rarely announced itself so boldly. "I'm just getting my morning coffee," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded SEAL teams through countless missions. No need for any trouble. Tyler Rage Roberts, Slash's second-in-command, sauntered closer, his eyes catching the glint of a small Navy pin on her jacket. "Hey Slash, check this out. The cripple's trying to play soldier." Before we continue with the story, if you're enjoying it, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow we've got another incredible true story you won't want to miss. Slash's laughter was sharp and mocking. "A disabled veteran, what did you do, sweetheart? Push papers until you fell out of your chair?" The words struck something deep inside Rachel, but her expression remained unchanged. They couldn't know about the countless missions she'd led, the lives she'd saved, the silver star that sat in a box in her closet. "I served my country," she said simply, folding her newspaper. Slash stepped closer, his boots scraping against the wooden boardwalk. "Served your country? Let me tell you something about service, sister. The only thing you're serving is as entertainment for my boys." The other gang members spread out, forming a loose circle around her wheelchair. Marcus had disappeared inside his store, his face pale as he reached for his phone. Rachel knew he was probably calling the police, but she also knew they wouldn't arrive in time to matter. "You should move along," Rachel continued, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous tone that would have warned anyone with real combat experience to back away. "This isn't going to end well for you." Slash's face twisted into something ugly. His hand shot out, grabbing the arm of her wheelchair. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. This is our town now, and in our town, even cripples show respect." Rachel's voice remained steady as she replied, "Respect is earned, son, and so far all I see are boys playing at being men." The words hung in the air like gun smoke, and for a moment, the only sound was the idle rumble of motorcycle engines. Then Slash's face contorted with rage, his hand moving toward Rachel's throat. What he didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. because while Rachel Miller might be in a wheelchair, she was about to remind these bikers why Navy SEALs were the most dangerous warriors on Earth, with or without the use of their legs. As Slash's hand moved toward Rachel's throat, her military training kicked in instantly. With lightning speed, she executed a wrist lock, using his own momentum to send him stumbling backward. The move was precise, efficient, pure SEAL training. "What the hell?" Slash sputtered, regaining his balance, his face flushing with rage and embarrassment. Rachel's mind flashed back to her final mission, the one that put her in this chair. Her team had been extracting a high-value target when the IED detonated. But before that day, she'd served 12 years as one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in recent history, though few knew of her accomplishments due to the classified nature of her missions. Through the store window, she caught Marcus's worried expression as he spoke urgently into his phone. But Rachel wasn't calling the police. Her hand moved to her cell phone, finding a number she hadn't dialed in 2 years. "Commander Sullivan, it's Rachel Miller. Remember that situation in Kandahar? I think it's time to call in that favor." Kate Sullivan, her former SEAL team leader, now commanded the largest veteran motorcycle club on the West Coast. The Iron Angels weren't just any biker group. They were all former Special Operations personnel, men and women who'd served in the most elite units across all branches. "Those veterans you see around town?" Rachel addressed Slash, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used to command SEAL teams through enemy territory. "They're not the kind you want to mess with." "Brave words from someone who can't even stand," Slash sneered. But there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice now. He'd never seen anyone in a wheelchair move that fast. One of the younger gang members, sporting a fresh snake tattoo, laughed nervously. "Hey, Slash, check this out." He pulled out his phone, his face suddenly paling. "Holy shit." She's not lying. Rachel Miller, first woman to complete Bud-esque training, multiple combat deployments, Silver Star recipient. If you're enjoying this story of courage and justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got more incredible true stories coming your way tomorrow. Slash's expression darkened. "I don't care if she's Wonder Woman. Nobody disrespects the Black Tide Riders." Rachel's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath her words. "Let me tell you something about respect. I earned mine pulling wounded Marines out of firefights while bullets flew past my head. I earned it leading teams through the worst combat zones on Earth. What have you done besides terrorize innocent people?" Her words struck a nerve. Slash signaled to his gang, and within moments they had surrounded her completely, their bikes blocking any escape route. "Get her!" Slash commanded, his voice trembling with rage. Instead of showing fear, Rachel smiled slightly. It was the same smile her teammates had learned to recognize, the one that meant the enemy had just made a fatal mistake. In the distance, the distinctive rumble of approaching motorcycles began to fill the air. This wasn't the chaotic roar of the Black Tide Riders. This was the synchronized thunder of a military unit moving as one. "Those aren't just any bikers," Rachel explained, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet boardwalk. "They're Navy SEALs, Army Delta, Marine Force Recon, Air Force PJs. The best of the best. And they don't take kindly to people threatening one of their own." The Iron Angels appeared on the horizon, their bikes moving in perfect formation. At their head rode Commander Kate Sullivan, her silver hair streaming behind her, her presence commanding respect without a word being spoken. Marcus watched in awe from behind his store window as 50 elite warriors poured onto the boardwalk, their motorcycles arranging themselves in a defensive perimeter around Rachel. These weren't the undisciplined riders he was used to seeing. These men and women moved with military precision. Commander Sullivan dismounted first, removing her helmet to reveal a weathered face marked by years of combat experience. Her eyes, sharp as ever, immediately found Rachel. "Been a long time, Lieutenant Miller," she said, her voice carrying the weight of shared battles. "Too long, Commander?" Rachel replied, straightening instinctively in her wheelchair. Old habits died hard, though I wish the reunion was under better circumstances. Kate's expression hardened as she glanced at the black tide riders, who suddenly looked much less imposing. Tell me everything. As Rachel recounted the morning's events, more iron angels gathered around, their faces growing darker with each detail. These warriors understood respect. They'd earned it the hard way in battles across the globe, watching their brothers and sisters fall and rise together. The Black Tide Riders, one of the veterans spat. They've been causing trouble up and down the coast. Time someone taught them a lesson. Kate raised her hand, silencing the murmurs. Rachel here taught me something important back in Kandahar. Remember what you told me that night, Lieutenant, when everyone else said the mission was impossible? Rachel smiled slightly. I told you that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. The transformation in the Black Tide Riders was visible.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Several had already backed away, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of real warriors. But Slash, his pride wounded, wasn't finished yet. This isn't over, he snarled, though his voice shook slightly. Nobody makes a fool of me in my own territory. Rachel's response was quiet, but carried to every ear on the boardwalk. Son, you did that all by yourself. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. In its light, two very different kinds of strength faced each other, one built on fear and intimidation, the other forged in the fires of real combat. The real battle for Oakridge Harbor was about to begin, and Rachel Miller was once again at the center of the storm. The Black Tide Riders retreated to their makeshift clubhouse at the edge of Oakridge Harbor, an abandoned fish processing plant that reeked of old seafood and diesel. Slash paced the oil-stained floor, his boots echoing against the concrete as his gang watched nervously. The morning's encounter had shaken their usual confidence, though none would admit it openly. Navy SEALs, Slash spat, kicking an empty beer can across the floor. Of all the people in this worthless town, we had to pick her. And not just any SEAL, one connected to the Iron Angels. Ghost, their enforcer, leaned against his bike, trying to maintain his tough exterior. So what? They're just another MC. We've dealt with rival clubs before. Viper, their intelligence officer, shook his head. No, these guys are different. They're not just bikers. They're special forces. They've seen real war. We've seen plenty of action, Slash growled, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Before we continue with this incredible story of justice and redemption, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss tomorrow's powerful true story. Meanwhile, at Marcus's store, Rachel sat with Commander Sullivan and several Iron Angels strategizing their next move. The morning crowd had gathered outside, watching in awe as elite warriors moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area. The Black Tide Riders have been terrorizing the entire coastline. Emma Martinez, Rachel's physical therapist and close friend, explained. They've hurt people, extorted businesses. The police seem powerless to stop them. Rachel nodded, her tactical mind already analyzing patterns. They're not just random thugs. They're organized, have a hierarchy. That means they have vulnerabilities. They've got connections too, Officer James Parker added, joining the group. Every time we get close to building a case, evidence disappears. Witnesses change their stories. Someone's protecting them. Commander Sullivan's expression darkened. Sounds like they've got friends in high places. Wouldn't be the first time corrupt officials enabled criminals. Rachel wheeled herself to the window, watching the harbor. Kate, remember that operation in Basra? When we couldn't hit the insurgents directly because of political protection? We cut off their supply lines, Kate nodded, understanding dawning. Isolated them until they made mistakes. Exactly. Rachel continued. The Black Tide Riders aren't just a gang, they're a business. They need fuel, supplies, places to launder their money. We start there. Sarah Wilson, who owned the Harbor Cafe, stepped forward. They use my place for meetings. I've been too scared to stop them, but now you're not alone, Rachel finished, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand. None of us are anymore. The Iron Angels spread out through town, their presence, both reassuring and intimidating. Unlike the chaos of the Black Tide Riders, they moved with military precision, establishing observation points, communication networks, and response protocols. Mike Anderson, one of Rachel's former SEAL teammates, coordinated the security arrangements. We've got eyes on their clubhouse. They're agitated, making calls. Something's coming. Rachel's instincts, honed through countless combat operations, told her the same thing. Slash wouldn't accept this challenge to his authority. He'd retaliate, try to reassert dominance. The question was how. They'll hit us at night, she predicted, remembering similar patterns from insurgent groups. Try to catch us off guard, probably target civilians to show they're still in control. Lisa Cooper, the community organizer, had been taking notes. We've got 15 businesses that have reported extortion, 3 cases of assault, and numerous threats. Most people have been too frightened to file official reports. That changes now, Rachel declared. Officer Parker, we'll need your help. Even if cases get blocked, we document everything. Build a paper trail so deep they can't bury it all. Kate nodded approvingly. She'd seen Rachel's strategic mind at work before, watched her turn seemingly impossible situations into victories. What else do you need, Lieutenant? Brian Foster's garage, Rachel replied. It's got clear lines of sight to both main roads, perfect for surveillance, and Emma's therapy clinic. We can use it as a command center. Nobody would suspect a physical therapy office. The plan took shape quickly. Military efficiency meeting small-town determination. The Iron Angels set up rotating patrols, their presence a constant reminder that the rules had changed. Local business owners, emboldened by the support, began sharing information about the Black Tide Riders' operations. Back at the fish plant, Slash was making calls of his own. They want to play war? I'll show them war. Get me Snake. Tell him I need his special services. Snake was the Black Tide Riders' connection to darker elements. Mercenaries, drug cartels, anyone willing to do the truly dirty work. His arrival would signal an escalation that could tear Oakridge Harbor apart. Rachel, anticipating this move, was already preparing countermeasures. Kate, we need to reach out to our old networks. When they bring in outside muscle, we need to know who and when. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Rachel watched from the clinic window as fishing boats returned home, their crews unaware that their peaceful town was about to become a battlefield. You know they'll come for you first, Emma said quietly, standing beside her friend's wheelchair. Slash won't be able to resist targeting you specifically. Rachel's smile was slight but determined. I'm counting on it. Sometimes the best way to spring a trap is to be the bait. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as the Iron Angels took their positions for the night watch. In the shadows of Oakridge Harbor, 2 forces prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of a town, but the true meaning of strength. The war for Oakridge Harbor was about to begin, and Rachel Miller was about to prove that true warriors never stop fighting, even when the battlefield changes. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oakridge Harbor as Rachel positioned her wheelchair at Emma's therapy clinic, now transformed into a command center. Maps covered the walls, surveillance photos were pinned alongside them, and communication equipment hummed quietly in the background. Snakes arrived, Mike Anderson reported, entering with fresh intel. 3 mercenary teams with him. These aren't street thugs, they're professionals. Rachel studied the photos, recognizing military-style formations in the mercenaries' movements. Ex-military, probably private contractors. They'll have actual training, real combat experience. If you're enjoying this story of courage and justice, hit that subscribe button. We've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow. Commander Sullivan joined them, her expression grim. Our spotters counted 12 men, all armed. They're setting up positions around town, focusing on high ground. They're establishing kill zones, Rachel noted, her tactical mind mapping out their strategy. But they're also showing us their playbook. These guys think they're hunting civilians. They don't realize they're up against special operations. Veterans. The Iron Angels had spent the night fortifying key positions throughout Oakridge Harbor. Brian Foster's garage had become a forward observation post, while Sarah Wilson's cafe served as a gathering point for intelligence. Local fishermen, eager to help, provided updates on water movements, noting any suspicious boats entering the harbor. "What's our play, Lieutenant?" Mike asked, using Rachel's old rank out of habit. Rachel wheeled herself to the large town map. "They're expecting us to be defensive, to protect potential targets. Instead, we're going to make them chase shadows while we hit their real vulnerabilities." She pointed to several locations. "The Black Tide Riders need 3 things to operate: fuel, money, and information. We cut off all 3. Lisa Cooper arrived with a stack of financial documents. "I've been tracking their money movements through town. They're using the old cannery for cash storage, and they've got accounts at 3 local banks." "Good work," Rachel praised. "Kate, how many of our people have banking backgrounds?" 4 former intelligence officers, Commander Sullivan replied. "They're already working on freezing suspicious accounts." Outside, the mercenaries made their presence known, patrolling the streets in tactical formations. Their message was clear: the Iron Angels weren't the only ones with military experience. Snake, a lean man with cold eyes and precise movements, observed the town from the fish plant's roof. "Your biker gang's methods are amateur," he told Slash. "You've let the townspeople band together. Now we have to break their unity before we can restore control." Slash bristled at the criticism, but couldn't deny its truth. "So what's your plan?" "We start with their leader," Snake replied, focusing binoculars on Rachel's wheelchair as she moved between buildings. "Break her. Break their spirit." What Snake didn't realize was that Rachel had survived worse odds in worse places. Her mind flashed back to a mission in Afghanistan, where her SEAL team had been outnumbered 5 to 1. They'd won that day through superior strategy and unconventional tactics. "They're watching me," Rachel informed her team. "Good. While they focus on the wheelchair, they're missing what's really happening." Throughout town, the Iron Angels' plan was already in motion. Brian Foster's mechanics were quietly sabotaging Black Tide Riders' bikes during routine maintenance. Sarah Wilson's cafe staff collected conversations and photographed meetings. Even Marcus's corner store played a role, tracking supply purchases that revealed the gang's patterns. Emma Martinez provided perhaps the best cover of all. As Rachel's physical therapist, her clinic was an obvious surveillance target. But while mercenaries watched the therapy sessions, they missed the real operation happening in the basement, where Iron Angels coordinated their movements using encrypted communications. "Rachel," Emma called out, concern in her voice. "They're getting bolder. One of Snake's men followed me to the grocery store today." "They're trying to isolate us," Rachel explained. "Standard insurgency tactic. Separate the leadership from the support network, but they don't understand what they're dealing with." Commander Sullivan gathered the core team that evening. "Snake's people are professionals, but they've got a critical weakness. They're mercenaries. They fight for money, not conviction. Push them hard enough, they'll calculate the cost isn't worth the payment. Rachel nodded. Exactly. And Slash doesn't have unlimited resources. Every day we disrupt their operations costs them money. Every account we freeze, every supply line we cut, brings us closer to victory. Mike Anderson returned from a reconnaissance run, his face serious. They're setting up sniper positions on the old lighthouse and the church tower. These guys know what they're doing. Of course they do, Rachel replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. And that's exactly why they'll fail. They're fighting the last war using traditional tactics, but we're not going to give them the battle they're expecting. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the water blood red. In the growing darkness, both sides prepared for what was coming. Snake's mercenaries checked their weapons and verified their fields of fire. The Iron Angels quietly moved their pieces into position, implementing Rachel's strategy with practiced precision. Tomorrow, Snake announced to his team, we show them what real professionals can do. By sunset, that wheelchair-bound seal will wish she'd never challenged us. But in Emma's clinic, Rachel's calm voice laid out a different future. Tomorrow, we remind them why Navy SEALs are the most feared fighters on Earth. Whether we're standing on our feet or seated in a wheelchair, we never lose our most dangerous weapon, our minds. The stage was set. In the streets of Oakridge Harbor, two kinds of warriors prepared to clash, those who fought for money and those who fought for something more. The next day would prove which was. Dawn broke over Oakridge Harbor with an eerie silence. The fishing boats remained docked, their crews warned away by the Iron Angels. Rachel wheeled herself to the clinic's window, observing the mercenaries' patrols through seasoned eyes. Just like you predicted, Emma said softly, handing Rachel her morning coffee. They've taken up positions at every strategic point. They're good, Rachel acknowledged, noting their professional movements. But they're fighting blind. They don't know what we've been setting up all night. If you're enjoying this story of strength and resilience, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. Throughout the night, the Iron Angels had been implementing Rachel's strategy. Brian Foster's mechanics had quietly disabled key vehicles around town, creating choke points that would funnel any enemy. Movement exactly where they wanted them. Sarah Wilson's cafe staff had spread disinformation through carefully staged conversations, feeding Snake's surveillance team exactly what Rachel wanted them to hear. Commander Sullivan joined them, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night. All pieces are in position. Mike's team has rigged the emergency broadcast system, and Lisa's people have their instructions. Rachel nodded, her mind replaying similar operations from her SEAL days. Snake's expecting a defensive operation. He thinks we'll try to protect the town piece by piece. Instead, we're going to trigger his own trap. At the fish plant, Snake was briefing his mercenary teams, their weapons cleaned and ready. The target will likely move between the clinic and the harbor front. We take her clean, fast, and public, break their spirit by showing them their hero is just a cripple in a chair. What he didn't know was that Rachel had spent months adapting her combat skills to her new reality. The wheelchair wasn't a limitation, it was just another tool in her arsenal. They're moving, Mike's voice crackled over the secure radio. 3 teams, approaching from different angles. Professional formation, using civilian vehicles as cover. Rachel smiled slightly. Right on schedule. Emma, time to start the show. Emma helped Rachel into her therapy van, making sure they were clearly visible to the watching mercenaries. As they drove toward the harbor front, Snake's teams began their coordinated movement. Target is mobile, a mercenary reported, moving exactly as predicted. But Rachel had learned long ago that the best way to counter professional soldiers was to change the battlefield itself. As the van approached the harbor, Lisa Cooper's team sprang into action. The emergency broadcast system suddenly blared to life, sirens wailing across town. Attention Oakridge Harbor residents, this is an emergency evacuation drill. Please proceed immediately to your designated assembly points. The streets erupted into choreographed chaos. Townspeople moved with practiced precision, following pre-arranged routes that forced Snake's teams to either break formation or risk exposing themselves. "What the hell is this?" Snake demanded, watching his carefully planned operation dissolve. "Local emergency drill," one of his men reported. "They're required by law to run them monthly for tsunami preparedness." But this was no ordinary drill. The Iron Angels had spent the night training key civilians, turning the entire town into an operational force multiplier. Every movement, every gathering point was designed to disrupt the mercenaries' carefully planned kill zones. Rachel's van stopped at the harbor front, where she smoothly transferred to her wheelchair. To the watching mercenaries, she appeared vulnerable, exposed. They couldn't see the Iron Angels hidden among the moving crowds, or the veterans positioned in seemingly abandoned buildings. "She's out in the open," Snake transmitted to his teams. "Move in. Remember, we want this public." The first team approached under cover of the milling crowds. They were good, their movements subtle, their weapons concealed, but they were facing opponents who'd spent careers hunting far more dangerous prey. As the mercenaries closed in, Rachel began her therapy exercises, seemingly oblivious to the danger. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, and each one signaled different elements of her counterattack force. 3 o'clock, she transmitted quietly, stretching her arms. 2 at 9, lead team approaching from the front. Commander Sullivan's voice came through her earpiece. "Ready when you are, Lieutenant." The trap was about to spring, but not the one Snake had planned. In their focus on Rachel, the mercenaries had missed the real danger. They were the ones who'd been surrounded. "Now!" Rachel commanded, and Oakridge Harbor exploded into action. The emergency sirens cut off abruptly, replaced by a different sound, the roar of Iron Angels' bikes emerging from every side street and alley. The civilians in the crowd suddenly moved with military precision, cutting off escape routes. Even the fishing boats in the harbor began moving, their crews, all veteran special operations forces, cutting off any water escape. Snake watched in dawning horror as his perfect ambush turned into a killing box. His teams were exposed, surrounded, and outnumbered by opponents who matched them in skill and exceeded them in motivation. "Still think I'm just a cripple in a chair?" Rachel's voice carried across the suddenly silent harbor front. "Stand down, or find out why Navy SEALs are considered the deadliest fighters on Earth, with or without legs." The morning sun had risen fully now, illuminating a scene that would be remembered in Oakridge Harbor for years to come. Professional mercenaries stood frozen, caught in a trap laid by a woman they'd gravely underestimated. The war for the town had just entered a new phase, and Rachel Miller was about to teach them all a lesson about the true meaning of strength. Snake's mercenaries slowly lowered their weapons, professional training warring with self-preservation. Rachel remained calm in her wheelchair, her presence commanding the harbor front as completely as she'd once commanded SEAL teams. "Lieutenant, your orders?" Commander Sullivan asked, her veterans maintaining a perfect perimeter around the trapped mercenaries. If you're enjoying this intense story of justice, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will leave you on the edge of your seat. "Secure their weapons," Rachel directed, "and get me Snake. It's time he learned who he's really dealing with." The mercenary commander was brought forward, his cold demeanor cracking slightly as he faced Rachel. His eyes kept darting to the Iron Angels surrounding them, recognizing the difference between ordinary bikers and special operations veterans. "You plan everything, don't you?" Snake said, professional respect reluctantly entering his voice. "This evacuation drill, the civilian movements, using the whole town as your operational space." "I learned in Fallujah that the battlefield is wherever you make it," Rachel replied. Now let's talk about your employer. Back at the fish plant, Slash watched through binoculars as his expensive mercenary force surrendered. His face contorted with rage and disbelief. Useless, all of them useless. Boss, Ghost warned, maybe we should cut our losses. These aren't regular vets we're dealing with. No, Slash exploded. I won't let some crippled seal take what's mine. Get everyone together. If Snake won't handle this, we'll do it ourselves. At the harbor front, Rachel was extracting information from Snake. The mercenary commander, recognizing a superior tactician, provided details about the Black Tide, Ryder's operation that surprised even him. They're just the visible part, Snake explained. There's a bigger organization behind them, using small-town bike gangs as cover for drug trafficking and money laundering. That's why they need Oakridge Harbor, Rachel concluded. Perfect stopping point between major cities, local police. Too overwhelmed to investigate deeply. Emma arrived with urgent news. Rachel, the Black Tide Riders are mobilizing. All of them. They're arming up with everything they've got. Rachel's expression remained calm, but her mind was already calculating angles and options. They're desperate. Slash knows he's losing control. He'll try something big, something public. How many? Commander Sullivan asked. At least 30 bikes, Emma reported. They're gathering everyone from neighboring chapters. Rachel wheeled, herself to the town map they'd set up. Kate, get our people into positions Alpha through Delta. Mike, I want sniper teams on the waterfront buildings. Emma, start evacuation procedures for the civilian areas. They'll be expecting that, Snake interjected. Professional courtesy had turned to grudging admiration. Slash isn't thinking tactically anymore. He'll want to hurt the town itself. I know, Rachel replied. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The sun climbed higher as Oakridge Harbor prepared for what was coming. The Iron Angels moved with military precision, evacuating civilians while establishing defensive positions. Rachel's plan had neutralized the professional threat, but an unhinged bike gang with nothing to lose could be even more dangerous. We've got movement, Mike's voice crackled over the radio. They're coming in hot, multiple directions, lots of weapons visible. Rachel positioned herself in front of the harbor's main square, her wheelchair a defiant presence in the morning light. Commander Sullivan stood beside her, along with a core team of Iron Angels. You sure about this? Kate asked quietly. Some battles need to be fought in the open, Rachel replied. Sometimes you have to let the enemy see exactly who they're facing. The thunder of motorcycles filled the air as the Black Tide Riders roared into town from every direction. Slash led the charge, his face a mask of rage and wounded pride. His gang had abandoned any pretense of being ordinary bikers. They carried weapons openly now, a clear violation that would bring law enforcement down on them eventually. But Rachel knew they didn't care about eventually. This was about now. About a man whose world was crumbling because he'd underestimated a woman in a wheelchair. Last chance, Rachel called out as the bikes circled the square. Surrender now, and we do this the easy way. Slash's response was to fire his pistol into the air. Easy way? Like how you crippled my reputation, made me look weak? There's only one way this ends now. Rachel's voice carried across the square, calm and deadly serious. You're right about that. There is only one way this ends. The question is, how many of your people are willing to die for your wounded pride? The Black Tide Riders shifted uneasily. Many had joined for the thrill, the sense of power over others. But facing combat veterans led by a wheelchair-bound SEAL who'd outmaneuvered professional mercenaries, that was something else entirely. Look around you, Rachel continued, addressing the gang members directly. You're surrounded by special operations veterans, people who've fought in real wars. This isn't a game anymore, and your leader just crossed a line he can't uncross. Several bikes backed away as her words sank in. Slash noticed the movement and raised his weapon again. "Anyone who runs is dead. We finish this now." But his authority was already crumbling. The gang members had seen what happened to Snake's professionals. They'd watched their leader's grip on power weaken with every failed attempt to control the situation. Rachel's next words would either end this peacefully or trigger the bloodiest day in Oakridge Harbor's history. The fate of the town hung in the balance, and once again, it all came down to a Navy SEAL who refused to back down. Before Rachel could respond to Slash's challenge, the roar of distant motorcycles filled the air again, but these weren't reinforcements for the Black Tide riders. Through her tactical training, Rachel recognized the synchronized approach of multiple units converging with military precision. "What the hell is that?" Slash demanded, his weapon still raised, but his voice wavering. If you're enjoying this story of courage and redemption, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will take your breath away. "That," Rachel replied calmly, "is what real power sounds like. Remember when I told you about earning respect? You're about to meet some people who've earned it the hard way." Over the horizon appeared dozens of motorcycles, moving in perfect formation. Leading them was a figure Slash had only heard whispers about: Colonel James Iron Hand Martinez, commander of the largest veteran motorcycle coalition on the West Coast. The Iron Angels were just one chapter of a much larger brotherhood. "You called in the coalition?" Commander Sullivan whispered to Rachel, impressed. "I called in everyone," Rachel responded. "Sometimes you need to show overwhelming force to prevent bloodshed." The coalition riders swept into the square like a coordinated military operation, their bikes forming concentric circles around the Black Tide riders. These weren't just any veterans. They were former Special Forces, Rangers, Marine Force Recon, and more SEALs. Each rider moved with the precision that only came from years of combat experience. Colonel Martinez dismounted, his prosthetic hand glinting in the sunlight, a reminder of sacrifices made in service. He approached Rachel's wheelchair and rendered a crisp salute. "Lieutenant Miller, heard you could use some backup." "Appreciate the response time, Colonel," Rachel replied, returning the salute. Slash's face had gone pale as he realized the full extent of what he was facing. His gang was now surrounded by over 200 combat veterans, all moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of real battlefield experience. "This is bigger than your little gang now," Rachel addressed Slash. "That shipment you're protecting for your real bosses? The one hidden in the fish plant's secret compartments? The DEA is seizing it as we speak." Slash's expression confirmed everything. The Black Tide Riders were just pawns in a larger operation, and Rachel had used them to expose the entire network. "You don't understand what you're doing," Slash warned, desperation creeping into his voice. "The people behind this, they'll kill everyone in this town." "No," Colonel Martinez stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced far worse threats. "They won't, because right now, every veteran motorcycle club from here to San Diego is mobilizing. We're not just taking back Oakridge Harbor, we're shutting down the entire operation." Rachel wheeled forward, her presence commanding despite her seated position. "Your choice, Slash. Surrender now, cooperate with the authorities, and maybe you survive what's coming, or keep pushing, and find out why America's Special Operations Forces are considered the deadliest warriors in history." Several Black Tide Riders immediately dropped their weapons, raising their hands. They could read the situation. They were surrounded by fighters who'd faced down insurgents, terrorists, and cartel armies. "Traitors!" Slash screamed, swinging his weapon toward his deserting members. Before he could fire, Rachel's wheelchair shot forward with explosive speed. Her years of SEAL training had taught her to adapt, to turn any situation to her advantage. The wheelchair wasn't a limitation, it was a weapon. She crashed into Slash's bike, using momentum and leverage to send both rider and machine sprawling. In the same motion, her hand struck a precise point on his wrist, causing the gun to clatter away. The remaining black tide riders, watching their leader taken down by a woman in a wheelchair, began surrendering en masse. The coalition veterans moved in smoothly, securing weapons and detaining gang members with professional efficiency. "Clear," came the calls from all sides as the square was secured. Colonel Martinez helped Rachel back into her proper position, respect evident in his movements. "Impressive takedown, Lieutenant. Remind me never to underestimate someone in a wheelchair." "The chair is just a tool, Colonel," Rachel replied. "The warrior spirit is what matters." As law enforcement began arriving, drawn by the commotion, Rachel surveyed the scene. The black tide riders were being processed, their weapons confiscated. More importantly, evidence of their connection to larger criminal enterprises was being uncovered. "DEA teams have the shipment," Commander Sullivan reported. "They're finding links to 3 different cartels. This is bigger than we thought." "It usually is," Rachel nodded. "That's why we needed the coalition. This isn't just about one town anymore. It's about shutting down an entire network." The sun had reached its zenith, casting no shadows as justice was served in the square of Oakridge Harbor. What had started as harassment of a disabled veteran had exposed a criminal enterprise spanning the entire coast. But for Rachel Miller, it was about more than just taking down criminals. She'd shown that true strength wasn't about physical abilities. It was about courage, strategy, and the unbreakable spirit of a warrior. The war for Oakridge Harbor was ending, but its impact would be felt far beyond the town's borders. A new chapter was beginning, one where veterans stood united against those who would prey on innocent communities. And it had all started because some bikers made the mistake of underestimating a woman in a wheelchair. In the aftermath of Slash's arrest, the situation at Oakridge Harbor grew more complex. The DEA's discovery of cartel connections had attracted dangerous attention. Rachel, monitoring communications from Emma's clinic, knew the real battle was just beginning. "We've got movement on the water," Mike reported. 3 speedboats approaching from the north, not local vessels. If you're enjoying this story of courage and determination, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Rachel wheeled to the harbor map, her tactical mind already calculating scenarios. "Cartel response team. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to clean up loose ends." Colonel Martinez nodded grimly. "Standard procedure. Eliminate witnesses, destroy evidence, send a message." The boats appeared on the horizon, sleek and powerful, clearly built for speed rather than fishing. Through high-powered binoculars, Rachel could see the heavily armed men aboard. "They're carrying military-grade weapons," Commander Sullivan observed. "These aren't street thugs. They're cartel enforcers." Rachel's mind flashed back to maritime operations during her SEAL career. They'll expect resistance from the shore. They won't expect what's waiting underwater. During the night, Mike's team had deployed several of their former combat divers. Now those veterans, using specialized equipment, waited beneath the harbor's surface. "All teams, execute Operation Undertow," Rachel commanded through secure channels. The cartel boats roared into the harbor, their engines cutting through the morning silence. They moved with professional precision, spreading out to cover different angles of approach. What they didn't notice was the slight disturbance in the water beneath them. Combat divers, veterans of countless underwater operations, attached magnetic devices to their hulls. "Devices planted," came the underwater team's confirmation. Rachel's voice carried across all frequencies. "Attention approaching vessels. You've entered a militarized zone. Your engines have been compromised. Stand down or be disabled." The cartel members responded with gunfire, their weapons spraying the shoreline. But Rachel had anticipated this, positioning her forces behind reinforced. "Cover. Now," she commanded. The magnetic devices activated. sending localized electromagnetic pulses through the boat's electrical systems. One by one, their engines died, leaving them drifting helplessly in the harbor. "Second wave incoming," Mike warned. 2 helicopters, armed, 5 minutes out. Rachel smiled slightly. "Right on schedule. Colonel, if you would." Colonel Martinez spoke into his radio. "Sky Team, you have permission to engage." From behind the coastal hills rose 2 AH-6 Little Bird helicopters, piloted by former Night Stalkers, the elite Army aviators who'd transported special operations teams on their most dangerous missions. "The coalition comes prepared," Martinez explained to a wide-eyed Emma. "We've got friends in interesting places." The cartel helicopters, suddenly finding themselves outmatched by superior pilots in superior aircraft, veered away. On the water, the disabled boats were being boarded by combat veterans who moved with the same precision they'd once used in counter-terrorism operations. "Clear," came the reports one after another as the cartel enforcers were subdued and secured. Rachel wheeled herself to the harbor's edge, watching as the captured cartel members were brought ashore. "Search everything," she ordered. "They'll have communications devices, probably codes. We need to track this back to the source." The DEA teams, working alongside the veterans, began processing the seized boats and their occupants. What they found confirmed Rachel's suspicions. This wasn't just about drugs. The cartel was using small coastal towns like Oakridge Harbor as part of a larger network of corruption and influence. "Rachel," Emma called urgently from the clinic's doorway. "You need to see this." Inside, they found documents from one of the captured boats, evidence of payoffs to officials all along the coast. The corruption went higher than anyone had suspected. "This is why they responded so quickly," Rachel realized. "We didn't just threaten their shipment, we threatened their entire infrastructure." Colonel Martinez studied the documents grimly. "They'll send more. These cartels don't give up territory easily." "No," Rachel agreed. "They don't. But they've never faced an enemy like us before. We're not fighting for money or power. We're fighting for our homes, our communities." The sun had reached its peak, casting harsh light on the captured boats and subdued cartel members. In the distance, Coast Guard vessels were approaching, summoned by the coalition's law enforcement. Contacts. This was no longer just about protecting one town. Rachel Miller, from her wheelchair, was orchestrating a campaign that would expose corruption and dismantle criminal enterprises up and down the coast. The war had escalated, but so had the response. Veterans who'd once fought America's enemies abroad were now defending their communities at home, led by a Navy SEAL who proved that true warriors never stop fighting no matter what challenges they face. The battle for Oakridge Harbor had become something much larger, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who serve, and a reminder that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones society underestimates. As evening approached Oakridge Harbor, Rachel gathered her core team at Emma's clinic. The day's victories had come at a cost. The cartel's response had confirmed their worst fears about the scale of corruption they faced. If you're enjoying this story of justice and determination, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will amaze you. They've got roots in every coastal town from here to Mexico, Mike reported, spreading out intelligence gathered from the captured enforcers. Police chiefs, port authorities, local officials, all compromised. Rachel studied the evidence, her mind already formulating strategies. Then we take it all down, not just here, but everywhere they've infected. Colonel Martinez shook his head. That's a tall order, Lieutenant. We're talking about dismantling an entire criminal empire. Wouldn't be the first time, Rachel replied, wheeling to the map that now showed the entire coastline. In Iraq, we faced similar networks. The key isn't just attacking their operations, it's exposing their corruption. Commander Sullivan entered with urgent news. Cartels making moves. They're consolidating forces in 3 major ports. Looks like they're preparing for a major push. Good, Rachel said, surprising everyone. Let them come. Every force they commit is another piece of evidence we can use. The clinic had become a command center for an operation that stretched far beyond Oakridge Harbor. Veterans from across the country were reporting in, each bringing their own skills and resources to the fight. We've got former intelligence officers analyzing their communication patterns, Mike explained. Ex-financial crimes investigators tracking their money, even some former JAG officers building legal cases. Rachel nodded. This isn't just about combat anymore. We're fighting them on every front. Legal, financial, social. The cartels are used to dealing with traditional law enforcement. They don't know how to handle an army of veterans who've seen their playbook before. Emma brought in more reports. Other coastal towns were reaching out, inspired by Oakridge Harbor's resistance. Communities that had lived in fear were finding their courage. They're calling you the Shield, Emma told Rachel, the warrior in the wheelchair who showed them they could fight back. Rachel dismissed the title, but she understood its importance. Sometimes people needed symbols to find their strength. The cartel's sending someone, Commander Sullivan reported grimly. Someone big. They call him the Architect. He's the one who designed their entire coastal operation. Perfect, Rachel replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. That's exactly what we want, their command structure exposed. Colonel Martinez studied her expression. You're planning something big. In Afghanistan, Rachel explained, we learned that sometimes the best way to dismantle a network is to let them think they're winning, make them commit their resources, reveal their hierarchy, expose their vulnerabilities. The sun had set over Oakridge Harbor, but the clinic blazed with activity. Veterans coordinated movements up and down the coast, preparing for what was coming. The Architect will want to make an example of us, Rachel continued. He'll bring everything he has, enforcers, corrupt officials, bought politicians, and when he does, we'll have them all in one place, Mike finished, understanding dawning. One operation to expose everything. Rachel wheeled to the window, watching the harbor lights reflect off the water. But it has to be perfect. These aren't just criminals. They're sophisticated operators with government connections. We need irrefutable evidence, documented chains of corruption, proof that can't be buried. The clinic door opened, admitting Sarah Wilson from the cafe. Rachel, they're starting to move. The corrupt officials are calling emergency meetings, trying to control the narrative. Let them, Rachel replied. Every meeting, every call, every attempt to cover this up, it's all evidence. We're not just fighting criminals anymore. We're fighting a system that enables them. Outside, more veteran motorcycles arrived hourly. The coalition had become something unprecedented. A nationwide network of trained warriors united against domestic corruption. You know what they'll try first, Commander Sullivan warned. They'll come after you, try to discredit you. They'll use your disability against you. Rachel's laugh was cold. Let them try. Every attack on me is just more proof of their desperation. Besides, they should know by now, never underestimate a Navy SEAL, wheelchair or not. The night deepened over Oakridge Harbor as plans were made and positions fortified. The Architect was coming, bringing with him the full power of a criminal empire that had corrupted entire cities. But he would find something waiting that no amount of money or influence could defeat. A brotherhood of warriors who'd sworn to protect their nation, led by a woman who'd proven that true strength had nothing to do with the ability to walk. The final battle for America's coastal communities was about to begin, and Rachel Miller was ready to show them all why Navy SEALs were considered the deadliest fighters on Earth, with or without the use of their legs. The architect arrived in Oakridge Harbor on a moonless night, his black SUV convoy moving with practiced precision through the empty streets. Rachel watched from the clinic window as the vehicles passed, counting assets and analyzing patterns. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. 6 vehicles, professional drivers, military-style formation, she noted to Commander Sullivan. He's bringing his own security detail. And look who's with him, Mike added, passing her surveillance photos. Local officials, police commanders, even a state representative, all arriving secretly in the dead of night. Perfect, Rachel smiled. They're doing exactly what we expected, gathering all the corrupt pieces in one place. The architect had chosen the abandoned fish plant as his command center, not knowing that the coalition had already wired it for surveillance. Every room, every meeting would be documented. Remember, Rachel briefed her team, we're not just collecting evidence of criminal activity, we're exposing the entire system of corruption. Every handshake, every payoff, every threat, it all gets recorded. The architect himself cut an imposing figure as he stepped from his vehicle, tall, immaculately dressed, with the cold eyes of someone who'd ordered countless deaths without remorse. Interesting choice, Lieutenant, he spoke, into the night air, knowing Rachel would be monitoring, using my own enforcer's communications to track our network. Very SEAL-like. Rachel keyed her microphone. Glad you appreciate the tactics. Should we skip the preliminaries and discuss why you're really here? Ah, yes, direct and professional. Your reputation precedes you. The architect's voice carried a hint of amusement. Though I must admit, I didn't expect my operation to be compromised by a woman in a wheelchair. That was your first mistake, Rachel replied, but not your biggest one. Inside the fish plant, the architect gathered his allies. Corrupt. Officials nervous about exposure. Compromised law enforcement worried about evidence trails. Cartel enforcers ready for violence. Our operation along this coast took years to build, he addressed them. Networks of influence carefully constructed, authorities carefully compromised. And now, because of one disabled veteran and her military friends, it's all at risk. The state representative spoke up, fear evident in his voice. The evidence they've gathered, if it goes public. It won't, the architect assured them. By morning, Oakridge Harbor will have suffered a tragic accident. Gas leak, probably. Very unfortunate. All evidence destroyed, along with anyone who might testify. What he didn't know was that Rachel had anticipated this exact scenario. As the corrupt officials plotted mass murder, coalition teams were already moving into position. All units ready, Commander Sullivan reported. Coast Guard standing by, FBI strike teams in place. We've got every exit covered. Rachel wheeled herself to the command center they'd established. Remember, we need them to incriminate themselves fully before we move. The evidence has to be overwhelming. Through hidden cameras, they watched the architect lay out his plan, a systematic destruction of not just Oakridge Harbor, but any community that dared resist cartel control. You see, Lieutenant, he spoke again, knowing she was listening. This isn't about drugs or money anymore. It's about power, control, the kind of things your military service was supposed to protect. You're right about one thing, Rachel responded. This is about protection, but not the kind you're thinking of. The architect smiled coldly. Ah, yes, the warrior code. Tell me, Lieutenant, how does a broken seal protect anyone? What can a woman in a wheelchair really do against an empire? Rachel's reply was calm, measured. Why don't you come find out? The trap was set. The architect's pride would be his downfall. In his determination to eliminate the threat to his operation, he'd gathered every corrupt player in one place. As midnight approached, Rachel gave the signal. All units, execute Operation Cleansing Tide. Remember, we need them alive to testify. The architect's empire was about to fall, brought down not by force of arms, but by the strategic mind of a Navy SEAL who'd proven that true strength had nothing to do with physical limitations. The war for America's coastal communities would end tonight, and it would end with justice. The night operation unfolded with military precision. Rachel coordinated from her command center as coalition forces moved silently into position around the fish plant. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will amaze you. All teams report status, Rachel commanded through secure channels. Alpha team in position. Bravo team ready. Charlie, team set. Delta team has eyes on all exits. The architect was still inside, finalizing his plans with the gathered corrupt officials. Through surveillance, they could hear every damning word. Once we eliminate this resistance, he was saying, we'll implement stricter control measures in every coastal town. Anyone who opposes us will serve as an example. Rachel's voice cut through their meeting. Actually, you're the ones who are about to become an example. The lights in the fish plant suddenly went dark. When they came back on seconds later, every exit was covered by coalition veterans. Former special operations soldiers moved with the same precision they'd used in countless raids. "What is this?" the architect demanded, maintaining his composure, even as others panicked. "This," Rachel replied, wheeling into view, "is what happens when you underestimate American veterans." The state representative tried to run, but was quickly subdued. Police chiefs reached for weapons, only to find themselves facing operators who'd spent careers disarming threats. The architect stood calmly, assessing the situation with professional detachment. "Impressive choreography, Lieutenant," he acknowledged. "But you forget, I own judges, prosecutors, entire departments. This ends the moment we reach a courthouse." Rachel smiled slightly. "That's where you're wrong. You see, while you were focused on me, you missed what was really happening." Commander Sullivan stepped forward with a tablet. "Every meeting, every transaction, every threat, all transmitted live to multiple federal agencies. You're owned. Officials are already being arrested across 3 states. The architect's composure finally cracked. "Impossible. Our network is too extensive, too well protected." "You built your empire on corruption," Rachel replied. "We built ours on brotherhood. That's why you never stood a chance." As if to emphasize her point, more reports flooded in. Synchronized raids were taking place up and down the coast. Corrupt officials were being arrested, cartel safe houses breached, evidence secured. "Your entire operation is being dismantled," Rachel continued. "Not just here, but everywhere you've spread your poison. The broken seal in a wheelchair just brought down your empire." The architect studied her with new understanding. "You used our own arrogance against us, made us think you were just a local problem." "No," Rachel corrected. "You did that yourself. You looked at a wheelchair and saw weakness. That was your fatal mistake." Federal agents began arriving to take custody of the prisoners. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, documents, witness testimonies. The corruption that had seemed unbreakable was crumbling. Emma approached Rachel as the last arrests were being made. "They're already calling this the largest anti-corruption operation in coastal history." "It's more than that," Rachel replied. "It's proof that you never know where true strength lies. Sometimes it's in the last place people look." The sun was beginning to rise over Oakridge Harbor, painting the sky in shades of hope. What had started as harassment of a disabled veteran had led to the exposure and dismantling of an entire criminal empire. Commander Sullivan joined them, watching the federal vehicles depart. "You know this will change everything. Other communities will see what's possible when people stand together." Rachel nodded. That's exactly what we wanted, not just to stop the corruption here, but to show everyone that they don't have to live in fear. The coalition veterans were already preparing to depart, their mission accomplished. But they left behind more than just a liberated town. They left a legacy of courage, a reminder that true warriors never stop fighting for what's right. The war for America's coastal communities was over, won not by force alone, but by the strategic mind of a Navy SEAL who'd proven that disability didn't mean inability. Rachel Miller had shown them all that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones society underestimates, and that true power lies not in the ability to walk, but in the courage to stand against injustice, no matter what form it takes. 1 year later, Oakridge Harbor had transformed into something extraordinary. Rachel sat in her customary spot by Emma's clinic window, watching the bustling harbor activity with quiet satisfaction. If you're enjoying this story of triumph and transformation, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story will inspire you. Hard to believe how much has changed, Emma remarked, joining her friend. The changes were everywhere. Where once fear had ruled, now community thrived. The fish plant had been converted into a veterans support center, helping disabled service members adapt and thrive. The harbor front, once a battleground, now hosted regular gatherings where former adversaries worked together for the common good. "You know what's really remarkable?" Commander Sullivan said, entering with her morning reports. "It's not just here. Every coastal town that was under cartel control has undergone similar transformations." Rachel nodded, wheeling herself to the center's main room, where photos lined the walls, images of other communities following Oakridge Harbor's example. They just needed to see it was possible. The architects' network had been completely dismantled. The evidence gathered that night had led to hundreds of convictions, from corrupt local officials to high-ranking cartel members. More importantly, it had exposed the systemic corruption that had allowed such operations to flourish. "They're implementing your program nationwide," Mike reported proudly, "using veterans to help communities resist organized crime. They're calling it the Harbor Shield Initiative." Rachel smiled slightly. "As long as they remember the most important lesson, never judge a warrior by their limitations." The clinic had become more than just a physical therapy center. It was now a training facility, teaching disabled veterans how to adapt their combat skills to civilian protection roles. Rachel's methods had proven that disability didn't diminish a warrior's effectiveness. It just meant finding new ways to fight. Colonel Martinez arrived with more news. "The coalition's expanded. We've got chapters in every coastal state now, all following your model. Turns out a lot of communities needed heroes in wheelchairs." "Not heroes," Rachel corrected. "Just warriors who remember their oath to protect, no matter what challenges they face." Through the window, she could see new arrivals at the center. Disabled veterans coming to learn, to heal, and to find new purpose. Among them were former adversaries, including some of the Black Tide riders who'd chosen redemption over destruction. "You changed more than just Oakridge Harbor," Emma observed. "You changed how people see disability, how they understand strength." Rachel wheeled onto the center's porch, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold. The same waters that had once brought corruption now carried hope to other communities. "Sometimes the greatest victories," she reflected, "aren't won by changing our circumstances, but by changing how we face them." The legacy of Oakridge Harbor would live on, not just in the criminals brought to justice or the corruption exposed, but in the countless lives transformed by the reminder that true strength comes in many forms. And it had all started because some bikers made the mistake of underestimating a woman in a wheelchair, a mistake that led to the liberation of an entire coastline and proved that the strongest warriors are often the ones society underestimates. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.